The autumn wind howled through the Colorado mountains, carrying with it the bitter promise of an early winter. In the Barrett household, nestled at the edge of a small mining town, the chill that permeated the weathered wooden walls had nothing to do with the season. Abigail Barrett pressed her face against the frost-kissed window, watching the last golden leaves dance their way to the ground. At 20 years old, she had learned that some storms came not from nature, but from within one's own home. Abigail, the sharp voice of her stepmother. Miriam, cut through her quiet contemplation like a whip crack. Stop your daydreaming and come here at once. With practiced obedience, Abigail smoothed her worn calico dress and made her way to the parlor, where Miriam sat in her favorite horsehair chair, looking every inch the matriarch she believed herself to be. Beside her, Eloise lounged on the settee, her golden curls catching the lamplight like spun honey. At 17, Abigail's half-sister possessed the kind of beauty that made men stumble over their words and women whisper behind their fans. "Yes, ma'am." Abigail stood with her hands clasped, a habit formed from years of trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. Miriam's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile on a kinder face. "We have received correspondence from Wyoming, from a Mr. Thomas Grant." Eloise giggled, twirling a curl around her finger. "He sounds positively desperate in his letters. A widower with a child, looking for a bride through the mail. How utterly common." "Common or not?" Miriam snapped, silencing her daughter with a look. "Mr. Grant owns considerable land and cattle. His first wife's death left him in need of a woman's touch in raising his daughter." Abigail's heart sank. She had seen the advertisement in the newspaper weeks ago, had watched as Eloise and Miriam had crafted careful responses, painting Eloise as the perfect frontier bride. The photographs they had sent showed Eloise at her finest, in her best Sunday dress with her hair arranged just so. "The wedding is arranged for next month," Miriam continued, her gray eyes fixed on Abigail with calculating coldness. "Mr. Grant has sent funds for the journey and a modest trousseau." "How exciting for Eloise," Abigail managed, though her throat felt tight. Once Eloise married, perhaps there would be less tension in the house. Perhaps Miriam would finally— "Oh, I'm not going," Eloise announced with a casual wave of her hand. "I've changed my mind entirely." The room fell silent save for the ticking of the mantel clock. Abigail watched as Miriam's face transformed from shock to fury to something far more dangerous calculation. "What do you mean you're not going?" Miriam's voice was deadly quiet. Eloise stretched like a satisfied cat. "Samuel Henderson has been calling on me. His father owns the largest mercantile in Denver. Why would I exile myself to some dusty ranch in Wyoming when I could live in comfort in a proper city? You made a commitment." "You made a commitment. Mother, I merely went along until something better presented itself." Eloise examined her fingernails with studied indifference. "Besides, we've already spent the money, Mr. Grant sent— It would be rather awkward to return it now, wouldn't it?" Abigail watched the exchange with growing unease. She knew that look in Miriam's eyes, had seen it before every punishment, every cruel twist of fate that had befallen her since her father's death 5 years prior. Slowly, like a hawk sighting prey, Miriam turned her gaze to Abigail. "No," Abigail whispered, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. "You're nearly the same height," Miriam mused, rising from her chair to circle Abigail. "With the right dress and your hair properly arranged." "Mother, you can't be serious," Eloise laughed, but there was interest in her eyes now. "Abigail could never pass for me. She's so plain." "Plain can be remedied. And Mr. Grant has never seen Eloise in person, only in photographs taken from a distance." Miriam stopped in front of Abigail, reaching out to tilt her stepdaughter's chin up with one cold finger. "You will go in Eloise's place." "That's fraud," Abigail protested, jerking away. "It's wrong. When he discovers the deception—" The slap came swift and sharp, leaving Abigail's cheek stinging. You will not speak to me of right and wrong, girl. You've lived under my roof, eaten my food, worn clothes I've provided. It's time you repaid that debt. Father's house, Abigail corrected quietly, touching her reddened cheek. Father's food, and the clothes are Eloise's cast-offs. Miriam's eyes narrowed dangerously. Your father is dead, and his debts died with him. I could have cast you out years ago, but I kept you on out of Christian charity. This is how you'll repay my kindness. And if I refuse, then you'll find yourself on the street before nightfall, with nothing but the clothes on your back. Winter's coming, Abigail. How long do you think you'd last? What work could you find? You have no references, no connections, no money. The truth of it settled over Abigail like a shroud. She had nothing and no one. The few friends she'd had before her father's death had distanced themselves once the family's financial troubles became known. Miriam had made sure Abigail had no opportunities to form new connections, keeping her busy with household chores and away from social gatherings. Please, Abigail tried once more. This is wrong, Mr. Grant seems like a decent man from his letters. He doesn't deserve to be deceived. Eloise laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Oh, Abigail, always so concerned with others. What about what you deserve, a chance to leave this place to have a home of your own, a husband, a child to care for? Built on a lie, Abigail countered. Built on necessity, Miriam corrected. You'll go, you'll marry him, and you'll make the best of it. Many women have married for far less reason with far less to gain. At least this Mr. Grant seems kind enough in his correspondence. Abigail sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. He'll know immediately. I look nothing like Eloise. He's a man who's been alone for 2 years, trying to raise a young daughter while managing a ranch. He's desperate enough to advertise for a bride. Do you really think he'll send you back? Miriam's smile was cold. Men are practical creatures. Abigail, he needs a woman to tend his house and his child. As long as you can fulfill those duties, he'll likely overlook the discrepancy. And if he doesn't, if he's furious at being deceived, then you'll be no worse off than if I turn you out now, Miriam said with a shrug. At least you'll have had a journey to Wyoming and a chance at something better. Abigail closed her eyes, seeing her future stretching before her in either direction, destitution on the streets of Colorado or a life built on deception in Wyoming. Either way, she would lose herself. The question was which loss she could better bear. When? She asked quietly, the single word tasting like ash in her mouth. Miriam's triumphant smile made Abigail's stomach turn. The train leaves in 3 days. That gives us time to prepare you properly. Eloise, bring down your blue traveling dress. It should fit with some alterations. As Eloise flounced from the room, eager to be part of the deception now that it cost her nothing, Miriam produced a bundle of letters tied with string. Study these, she commanded, dropping them in Abigail's lap. Learn everything Eloise told him. Your life may depend on maintaining this fiction convincingly. Abigail picked up the letters with trembling fingers. Thomas Grant's handwriting was strong and clear, his words thoughtful and earnest. He wrote of his daughter, Leah, 6 years old and motherless since the age of 4. He wrote of his ranch, the cattle and horses, the wide open spaces that could swallow a man's loneliness if he let it. He wrote of his hopes for a companion, someone to share both the burdens and the blessings of frontier life. I do not promise luxury, one passage read, but I promise respect, kindness, and a true partnership in building a life together. My Leah needs a woman's gentle guidance, and I confess I need the warmth of companionship in this too quiet house. I hope, Miss Eloise, that you might find with us the home and purpose you seek. Tears blurred Abigail's vision. This man was offering his heart, his home. His trust to a woman who didn't exist for the Eloise he'd been writing to was as much a fiction as the one Abigail would now become. I suggest you practice Eloise's signature, Miriam said, watching Abigail read. And remember, once you leave this house, Abigail Barrett ceases to exist. You are Eloise Barrett, age 19, accomplished in music and needlework, with a gentle disposition and a love of children. Eloise hates children, Abigail murmured. The real Eloise is no longer your concern. You must become the Eloise that Thomas Grant expects, or face the consequences alone. That night, as Abigail lay in her narrow bed in the cold attic room, she pressed Thomas Grant's letters to her chest and wondered if a lie could ever transform into truth through sheer force of will. Outside her window, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering the familiar world in a blank white shroud. In 3 days, Abigail Barrett would cease to exist. In her place would rise Eloise, a phantom bride traveling toward a destiny built on deception. Yet, as she reread Thomas's earnest words by candlelight, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps in losing herself, she might find something she'd never dared dream of, a place where she truly belonged, even if she arrived there bearing another's name. The die was cast. The journey to Wyoming and to whatever fate awaited her there would begin with the morning train. The train whistle pierced the morning air like a mournful cry, and Abigail clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as she stood on the platform. The blue traveling dress that had once been Eloise's hung loose on her slighter frame, hastily taken in by Miriam's cruel needle. Her stepmother and half-sister had come to see her off, not out of affection, but to ensure she boarded the train and didn't attempt to flee. "Remember," Miriam hissed, gripping Abigail's arm hard enough to bruise. "You are Eloise now. One word to anyone about this arrangement, and I'll ensure you're arrested for fraud and theft. The money Mr. Grant sent was in Eloise's name, after all." Abigail nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. The conductor called for final boarding, and she pulled away from Miriam's grasp. Climbing the steps into the passenger car without looking back, she found a seat by the window and watched as the only world she'd ever known began to slide away, replaced by an endless expanse of prairie and possibility. The journey to Wyoming would take 3 days, with multiple stops and changes. Abigail had never traveled beyond the confines of her small Colorado town, and, despite the circumstances, she felt a flutter of excitement as the landscape transformed before her eyes. Mountains gave way to rolling hills, then to vast plains that seemed to stretch forever beneath an impossibly wide sky. She kept Thomas Grant's letters in her reticule, reading and rereading them until she had memorized every word. In quiet moments, she practiced Eloise's signature, though her hand trembled each time she formed the false name. The other passengers paid her little mind. A young woman traveling alone to meet her intended was common enough in these times of westward expansion. On the second day, the train stopped in Laramie for several hours. Abigail ventured into the bustling frontier town, marveling at the mix of people, cowboys and merchants, ladies in fine dress and women in practical calico, Chinese laborers from the railroad camps, and Native Americans trading at the general store. The air smelled of dust and horses, leather and possibility. At a small restaurant near the depot, she ordered a simple meal with some of the traveling money Miriam had grudgingly provided. The waitress, a motherly woman with kind eyes, smiled at her. "Traveling far, dear?" To meet my fiancé near Cheyenne," Abigail managed, the lie sticking in her throat. "Mail-order bride?" the woman asked without judgment. "We see many brave young women passing through. Takes courage to start fresh in a new place." Courage. Abigail turned the word over in her mind. Was it courage that drove her onto this train, or merely desperation? Perhaps there was little difference between the two. That night, as the train rocked through the darkness, Abigail dozed fitfully. She dreamed of Thomas Grant's face, though she'd never seen even a photograph of him. In her dreams, he was sometimes kind, sometimes furious at her deception, but always, there was a small girl at his side, watching with solemn eyes. The final day dawned clear and cold. The conductor announced they were approaching Cheyenne, and Abigail's heart began to race. She smoothed her travel-worn dress and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them, then laughed bitterly at the vanity. What did it matter how she looked when her very presence was a lie? At the Cheyenne station, she was to take a stagecoach to the smaller town of Cedar Ridge, where Thomas would meet her. The stagecoach journey proved even more arduous than the train's 6 hours of bone-jarring travel over rough roads. Squeezed between a traveling salesman who reeked of bay rum and a minister's wife who spent the entire journey warning about the moral dangers facing young women in the territories. By the time they reached Cedar Ridge, Abigail was dusty, exhausted, and trembling with nerves. The town was smaller than she'd expected, just a main street with a handful of buildings, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and various other establishments. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. She stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the stage depot, carpetbag at her feet, searching the street for a man who might be Thomas Grant. Several men touched their hats as they passed, but none approached. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Then she saw him. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of hard work rather than idle strength. His dark hair was neatly trimmed beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his face was weathered but handsome in a quiet way. He wore clean but practical clothes, canvas pants, a blue flannel shirt, and well-worn boots. But it was the small figure beside him that made Abigail's breath catch. The girl couldn't have been more than 6, with dark curls escaping from beneath her calico bonnet and eyes the same deep brown as her father's. She clutched his hand tightly, standing slightly behind his leg as she peered at the people disembarking from the stage. Thomas Grant's eyes found Abigail, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other across the dusty street. Then, with the girl in tow, he approached. Abigail forced herself to stand straight, to smile as Eloise might have smiled, though she had no idea how to be anyone other than herself. "Miss Barrett." His voice was deep, with a slight roughness that suggested he wasn't accustomed to much conversation. "Miss Eloise Barrett." The name hit her like a physical blow, but she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Grant." He removed his hat, revealing hair that curled slightly at the temples. "Thomas, please. And this is my daughter, Leia." The little girl peered up at Abigail with curious, assessing eyes. There was something old in that gaze, a wariness that spoke of loss experienced too young. "Hello, Leia," Abigail said softly, crouching down to the child's level. "What a pretty name. Does it mean something special?" Leia glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "Mama said it meant from heaven in her language," the girl whispered. "She was from far away." "How lovely," Abigail murmured, her heart aching for this motherless child. Names can carry beautiful meanings. "What does Eloise mean?" Leia asked. Abigail's stomach twisted. "It means healthy and wide," she said, recalling something she'd once read, though what her own name, Abigail, meant father's joy, seemed like a cruel irony now. Thomas cleared his throat. "We should get moving. The ranch is an hour's ride, and we'll want to arrive before full dark." He picked up her carpetbag as if it weighed nothing. "This all you brought?" Travel light," Abigail said, acutely aware of how meager her belongings must seem. "Practical," he approved. "Come, the wagon's this way." The wagon was sturdy and clean, with a bench seat up front and supplies in the back covered with a tarp. Thomas helped her up with careful propriety, his hand warm and calloused even through her glove. Leia scrambled up to sit between them, maintaining a careful distance from Abigail but watching her with those 2 wise eyes. As they left Cedar Ridge behind, the landscape opened up into rolling grassland dotted with clusters of pine and aspen. The mountains loomed larger here, their presence both protective and imposing. Thomas handled the team of horses with easy competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. "That's Miller's Creek," he said, indicating a line of cottonwoods. "Good fishing there in spring. And see that notch in the mountains? That's Wheeler Pass. Snow will close it soon. Not that we have much cause to go that way." Abigail listened, trying to memorize everything. This would be her world now if Thomas allowed her to stay once he discovered the truth. She stole glances at him as he drove, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he squinted against the setting sun, the gentle way he answered Laya's occasional questions. "Are you really going to be our new mama?" Laya asked suddenly, turning those penetrating eyes on Abigail. The question hung in the air like smoke. Abigail felt Thomas tense beside her, though he didn't intervene. I hope we can be friends first," Abigail said carefully. "Would that be all right?" Laya considered this. "I had a friend once, Mary Catherine, but she moved away." "That must have been hard," Abigail said. "It's difficult when people we care about leave." "Like Mama," Laya said matter-of-factly. "She didn't want to go, but the fever took her anyway." "Laya," Thomas said gently, "remember what we discussed about giving Eloise time to settle in?" "I remember," Laya said. Then, to Abigail, "Papa says you can play piano. Can you teach me?" Another lie to maintain. Eloise had boasted of her musical accomplishments in her letters. Abigail could barely pick out a tune. Perhaps, we'll see what's possible." The rest of the journey passed in relative quiet, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the distant cry of hawks, as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Thomas turned the wagon down a lane bordered by wooden fence posts. "There," he said, and Abigail heard a note of pride in his voice. "Home." The house that came into view surprised her, from Thomas's modest letters. She'd expected something small and rough. Instead, she saw a 2-story frame house with a wide porch, glass windows that caught the last light, and what looked like the beginning of a garden plot to one side. Behind it stood a substantial barn, corrals with several horses, and other outbuildings. This wasn't the struggling operation of a desperate man. It was a thriving ranch. It's beautiful," Abigail breathed, and meant it. Thomas's face softened. "I've worked hard to build something solid here, something that will last." He glanced at her, then away. Something worth sharing. As he helped her down from the wagon, Abigail felt the weight of her deception pressing heavier than ever. This man had built a life of honest work and careful planning. He'd invited Eloise to share in something real and valuable, and she was repaying that invitation with lies. Laya ran ahead to the house, calling back, "I'll show you your room. Papa fixed it up special." "She's been excited," Thomas said quietly, lifting Abigail's carpet bag. "She's been alone with just me for too long. She needs—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "She needs what I can't give her." Mr. Grant Thomas," Abigail began, her conscience warring with her survival instinct. He turned to face her in the gathering dusk, and something in his expression made her words die. There was a loneliness there that echoed her own, a careful hope that made her heart constrict. "I know this is strange," he said, "meeting as strangers, planning to build a life together, but I want you to know I meant what I wrote in those letters, about partnership, about respect, about building something together. I'm not asking you to. That is, we can take time to know each other properly. There's a separate room prepared for you, for as long as you need it." The kindness in his words, the decency in his manner, nearly undid her. Abigail felt tears threaten and blinked them back. How could she deceive this man? How could she not, when the alternative was destitution? "Thank you," she whispered. "That's very considerate." "From the house," Laya's voice called out. "Are you coming? I want to show you everything." Thomas smiled, and it transformed his face. "We'd better go. Once she gets an idea in her head, there's no stopping her. Gets that from her mother." As they walked toward the house that would be her refuge or her ruin, Abigail made a silent vow. Whatever came of this deception, she would do right by that little girl. She would be the friend, the guide, the maternal presence Leia needed. It might not absolve her of the lie, but perhaps it could balance the scales somehow. The mountains stood witness as she crossed the threshold, leaving the last of the journey behind and stepping into an uncertain future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deceptions to maintain or truths to reveal. But tonight, as Leia chattered excitedly and Thomas lit the lamps with careful hands, Abigail allowed herself just a moment to imagine that she truly belonged here. The journey to Wyoming was over. The real journey toward truth, trust, and perhaps even love was about to begin. The first morning at the Grant Ranch arrived with a rooster's crow and the distant lowing of cattle. Abigail woke in the prettiest room she'd ever occupied, simple but clean, with blue gingham curtains, a handmade quilt on the iron bed, and a small writing desk by the window. Thomas had indeed fixed it up special, and the thoughtfulness of it made her chest tight with guilt. She dressed quickly in one of her plain work dresses, grateful that Eloise's fancier garments had been deemed unnecessary by Miriam. At least in this, she wouldn't have to pretend. She braided her dark hair simply and made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and bacon. Thomas was already at the stove, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large man. He turned at her footstep, and something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well. I usually do the cooking, but I thought, that is, if you'd prefer to take over the kitchen duties." "I'd be happy to help," Abigail said quickly. "Though I should warn you, my cooking is simple fare, nothing fancy." "Simple is good," Thomas replied, relief evident in his voice. "Leia and I aren't used to fancy." As if summoned by her name, the little girl appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, clutching a well-worn rag doll. She studied Abigail with those serious brown eyes, then padded over to her father. "Morning, Papa," she mumbled against his leg. "Morning, sweetheart. Remember your manners." Leia turned to Abigail. "Good morning, Miss Eloise." The false name was like a pebble in Abigail's shoe, constantly reminding her of her deception. "Good morning, Leia. And please, you can call me." She paused, caught between the lie and an inadvertent truth. "You can call me whatever feels comfortable." "Can I call you Abby?" Leia asked unexpectedly. Mary Catherine's mama was called Abby, and she was nice. Abigail's heart nearly stopped. Abby so close to her real name. She glanced at Thomas, who shrugged. "If Eloise doesn't mind a nickname," he said. "Abby is fine," Abigail managed, her voice only slightly strangled. It felt like a small rebellion against the lie, a tiny piece of her true self she could keep. After breakfast, Thomas showed her around the ranch properly. The operation was even more impressive in daylight. 20 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, a milk cow, and a large vegetable garden that had been recently harvested. "I have 2 hired hands who help with the cattle," Thomas explained as they walked. "The Johnson brothers, Sam and Pete. Good men, they live in the bunkhouse out back. They take their meals with us sometimes, especially in winter." Abigail nodded, mentally cataloging everything. The ranch was prosperous but not ostentatious, built with practicality and an eye toward the future. Thomas had created something lasting here, something worth protecting. Leia tagged along, her initial wariness slowly giving way to curiosity. She showed Abigail her favorite barn cat, the new calf in the far pasture, and the spot where wildflowers grew in spring. "Mama planted those," she said, pointing to a row of dormant rose bushes near the house. "Papa keeps them watered even though they're just sticks now." "They'll bloom again come summer," Thomas said quietly. "Things that have good roots always come back." That afternoon, while Thomas worked with the horses, Abigail tackled the house. It was clean enough for a bachelor household. but she could see where a woman's touch had been absent. She started with the kitchen, organizing and scrubbing, finding satisfaction in the simple work. Leah watched from the doorway. "You clean different than Mrs. Morrison," she observed. "Who's Mrs. Morrison?" "The lady from town who used to come help sometimes. Papa stopped asking her because she kept trying to get him to notice her daughter." Leah wrinkled her nose. "Her daughter smells like pickles." Despite herself, Abigail laughed. "Well, I promise I don't smell like pickles." "You smell nice." Leah decided, "Like soap and something sweet. Can I help?" "Of course. Can you show me where everything belongs?" They worked together companionably, and Abigail found herself charmed by the little girl's chatter. Leah was bright and observant, with a child's directness that could be both disarming and insightful. "Are you scared to be here?" Leah asked suddenly as they folded clean dishcloths. "Why do you ask that?" "You look scared sometimes, like when Papa says your name." Abigail's hands stilled. Children saw too much sometimes. "It's all very new," she said carefully. "Change can be frightening, even when it's good change." Leah considered this. "I was scared when Mama died. Papa was too, but he pretended not to be." "That was very brave of both of you." "Papa says being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs doing anyway." Leah paused. "Are you doing what needs doing?" The question hung in the air, far too perceptive for a 6-year-old. Before Abigail could answer, they heard Thomas's boots on the porch. "Something smells good," he called, entering the kitchen. Abigail had found ingredients for a simple stew, and it bubbled on the stove. The kitchen was transformed clean, organized, with fresh bread cooling on the table and the windows thrown open to let in the autumn air. Thomas stopped in the doorway, an odd expression on his face. It feels different in here." "I hope I didn't overstep," Abigail said anxiously. No, it feels alive again." He cleared his throat. "Thank you." That evening, after supper, they sat in the parlor, Thomas reading a week-old newspaper, Leah playing with her doll, and Abigail mending one of Leah's dresses she'd found in the sewing basket. It was startlingly domestic, like a painting of family life, except for the careful distance maintained between the adults and the secret that sat like a stone in Abigail's chest. "Will you tell me a story?" Leah asked, settling beside Abigail on the small sofa. "What kind of story would you like?" "Something true, from when you were little." Abigail panicked. Any true story from her childhood would reveal the deception. But looking at Leah's expectant face, she couldn't disappoint her. "Once," she began carefully, "there was a little girl who loved to climb trees. Her mother always scolded her for it, saying it wasn't ladylike, but her father—" She paused, remembering. Her father would lift her up to reach the lowest branch and say, "The world looks different from up high, doesn't it?" Did she climb very high?" "As high as she dared. And from up there, she could see over the rooftops, past the edges of town, all the way to where the sky met the earth. She would imagine all the places she might go someday, all the adventures waiting beyond the horizon." Thomas had lowered his newspaper, watching her with an unreadable expression. "What happened to her?" Leah asked. "She grew up," Abigail said softly. "But she never forgot what the world looked like from up high, never forgot that there was always something beyond the horizon." Leah yawned, snuggling closer. "I like that story. Will you teach me to climb trees?" "If your father approves," Abigail said, glancing at Thomas. "I suppose," he said slowly. "Every child should know what the world looks like from up high." Later, after Leah had been tucked into bed insisting that Abby be the one to hear her prayers, Abigail found Thomas on the porch, smoking his evening pipe. "May I join you?" she asked. He gestured to the other rocking chair. "Please." They sat in silence for a while. watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Finally, Thomas spoke. "That story you told Leia about the girl in the trees, that was you, wasn't it?" Abigail's heart raced. Yes. Your letters never mentioned a father who encouraged tree climbing. They spoke of a very proper upbringing." She gripped the arms of the rocking chair, waiting for the accusation, the anger. Instead, Thomas continued quietly. "People sometimes present themselves differently in letters than they are in life. I understand that. What matters to me is who you are here, now." "And who am I?" she whispered. "You're someone who made my daughter smile. Someone who brought warmth back to this house in just one day. Someone who tells stories about reaching for horizons." He turned to look at her in the dim light. "That's enough for now." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. His kindness was worse than anger would have been. "Thomas, No," he said gently. "Whatever you're about to say, you don't need to say it yet. We have time. He gestured between them. "Whatever this becomes, we'll build it slowly, on truth, when you're ready for it." She stared at him. This unexpected man who seemed to see through her deceptions, yet chose patience over confrontation. "What if the truth disappoints you?" she asked. "Then we'll face that when it comes. But Eloise," she flinched at the name, "or Abby, as Leia calls you, I've learned that people are rarely just one thing. Whatever brought you here, whoever you really are, you chose to come. That takes courage." That night, as Abigail lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch wind in the cottonwoods, distant cattle, the old house settling, she thought about truth and lies, about names and identity. Leia had given her a gift without knowing it, calling her Abby. It was like a bridge between who she'd been and who she was pretending to be. The next morning brought routine breakfast, chores, Leia's constant questions, but something had shifted. The house felt less like a stage where she was performing and more like a place where she might actually belong. Days passed in this fashion. Abigail learned the rhythms of ranch life, discovered that she had a talent for making bread that Thomas praised and Leia devoured. She taught Leia her letters and numbers, helped Thomas with the ranch accounts, grateful for once for the education her father had insisted upon, and slowly, carefully, began to feel the edges of her false identity blurring. The moment that changed everything came a week after her arrival. Leia had been quiet all day, and by evening she was feverish. Thomas paced the kitchen while Abigail sat by the child's bedside, cooling her face with damp cloths and whispering soothing words. "Is she going to die like Mama?" Leia asked in a small, frightened voice. "No, sweetheart," Abigail said firmly, though fear clutched at her own heart. "You have a small fever, that's all. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." "Promise." "I promise." Leia's hot little hand gripped hers. "I prayed for a mama," she whispered. "Every night after the other one went to heaven, I asked God to send someone nice who wouldn't leave." Abigail's throat closed with emotion. "And then you came," Leia continued drowsily. "You're different than I thought you'd be from Papa's letters. But better different, like God knew what we needed even if we didn't." She drifted off to sleep then, her fever breaking near dawn. Abigail stayed by her side all night, Thomas bringing coffee and sitting with them in silent vigil. When the crisis passed and Leia woke asking for breakfast, Thomas caught Abigail's hand. "Thank you," he said roughly. "I couldn't have, after losing her mother." "She's going to be fine," Abigail assured him, squeezing his hand in return. It was the first time they'd touched beyond the propriety of helping her into wagons, and the warmth of his calloused palm against hers sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. That evening, as Leia played quietly with her doll, recovered but still weak, she looked up at Abigail with those wise brown eyes. "I was right," she announced. "God did send you after all. Even if you're scared sometimes, even if you're different than the letters said, He sent the right person." Abigail felt the weight of the child's faith like a blessing and a burden combined. She was living a lie, yes, but she was also living a truth, the truth of care given and received, of a household coming back to life, of a little girl's prayers answered in the most unexpected way. The false name still chafed. The deception still weighed. But something was taking root here in this Wyoming ranch, something that, like Thomas's carefully tended roses, might bloom into beauty despite its thorny beginnings. The first snow of winter came early that year, blanketing the Wyoming ranch in pristine white just 3 weeks after Abigail's arrival. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Thomas and his hired hands move the cattle to closer pastures, their figures dark against the dazzling landscape. The sight stirred something in her chest, a proprietorial feeling that frightened her with its intensity. "Abby, look," Leah called from the parlor. "I made snow angels from paper." Abigail turned to find the floor littered with cut paper figures, Leah's tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on another. The domestic scene was so natural, so right, that it made her heart ache. Each day that passed wove her deeper into the fabric of their lives, making the eventual unraveling all the more terrible to contemplate. That evening, Thomas lingered after supper, helping her clear the dishes, something he'd begun doing more often. Their hands brushed as she passed him plates, and she felt the contact like static electricity. "The Johnson brothers speak highly of you," he said, drying a dish with careful attention. "Sam says you make the best biscuits he's ever tasted." "They're kind men," Abigail replied, grateful for the dim lamplight that might hide her blush. "Though Pete tells terrible jokes." Thomas chuckled, a warm sound she'd grown to treasure. "That he does, but they're good workers, and they respect you. That matters out here." She felt his eyes on her as she washed, the weight of his regard both thrilling and terrifying. When she turned, he was closer than expected, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Eloise," he began, and she flinched involuntarily. He noticed. Of course, Thomas noticed everything. "I'm sorry. I know you prefer Abby." "It's all right." She lied. "No, it's not. A person's name should feel like home on the lips of those who care for them." He set down the dish towel, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling for words. "And I do care for you, more than I expected to, more than might be wise, given how short a time you've been here." Abigail's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Thomas." "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I promised we'd take time, and I meant it. But I thought you should know. You've brought something back to this house, to our lives, that I thought was gone forever." Leah laughs again. "The rooms feel warm even when the fire's low. And He paused, then forged ahead. "I find myself looking forward to coming in from the cold, knowing you'll be here." The weight of her deception pressed down on Abigail like a physical thing. This good man was offering his heart, and she was accepting it under false pretenses. "I don't deserve—" "Don't." His voice was firm but gentle. "Don't tell me what you deserve. Let me be the judge of that." Before she could respond, Leah appeared in the doorway, trailing her beloved rag doll. "Papa, Abby, I can't sleep. My throat hurts." The moment shattered. Thomas immediately went to his daughter, feeling her forehead with practiced concern. "No fever, sweetheart. Let's get you some honey tea." As Abigail prepared the remedy her own mother had once made for her, she caught Thomas watching her with an expression that made her chest tight. The three of them sat around the kitchen table, Leah sipping her tea and telling them about the dream she'd had where her paper angels came alive and danced in the snow. "That sounds beautiful," Abigail murmured, stroking the child's hair. "Will you sing to me?" Leah asked. "Mama used to sing when I couldn't sleep." Abigail hesitated. Eloise had claimed to have a lovely singing voice, trained by expensive teachers. Abigail's voice was untrained, ordinary, but looking at Leah's hopeful face, she couldn't refuse. She chose a simple lullaby her father had sung to her, her voice soft and slightly uncertain at first, but growing stronger as the familiar words returned. "Hush now, my darling. The day is done. Stars are awakening one by one. Safe in this house where love stands guard. Sleep now, my darling. The day was hard." When she finished, Leia was drowsing against her shoulder. Thomas's eyes were suspiciously bright. "That's not a song I know," he said quietly. My father sang it," Abigail admitted. "He said his mother sang it to him, brought over from the old country." "Ireland." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Another piece of truth, slipping out despite her careful guard. Thomas carried Leia up to bed, and Abigail followed, tucking the quilts around the sleeping child. In the hallway afterward, they stood awkwardly, neither wanting to end the evening but unsure how to proceed. "Thank you," Thomas said, "for the song, for being so good to her." "I love her," Abigail said simply, and realized it was true. "She's easy to love." "Yes," Thomas agreed, but he was looking at Abigail when he said it. The next days brought a new rhythm to their interactions. Thomas found reasons to linger in the house. Small repairs that had waited months suddenly became urgent. Paperwork that could be done at the kitchen table instead of in the barn office. He brought her small gifts from town: a new thimble, a packet of flower seeds for spring planting, a blue ribbon that matched her eyes. "For your hair," he said awkwardly when presenting the ribbon. "The color reminded me, that is, I thought you might like it." Abigail treasured each gift, even as they increased her guilt. She began wearing her hair differently, incorporating the ribbon, and noticed how Thomas's eyes lingered on the change. One evening, a blizzard struck with little warning. The Johnson brothers had gone to town and couldn't return, leaving Thomas to manage the stock alone. He came in after dark, half frozen and exhausted. Abigail had kept supper warm and water heating for a bath. "You're spoiling me," he said through chattering teeth as she poured hot coffee and fussed over his frozen fingers. "Someone needs to take care of you for a change," she replied, then blushed at the implication. But Thomas only smiled, that slow, warm smile that transformed his weathered features. I could get used to it. As he thawed by the fire, Leia curled on his lap. Abigail found herself telling them stories of her childhood, carefully edited to remove identifying details, but true in their essence. Stories of a father who loved books and learning, who taught her to see wonder in small things. Stories of a time before loss and hardship, when the world had seemed full of possibility. "He sounds like a good man," Thomas said when she paused. "He was, I think you would have liked each other. I'm sorry you lost him so young." The sympathy in his voice nearly undid her. How could she accept his compassion when he didn't even know her real name? That night, the blizzard still raging, Abigail couldn't sleep. She crept downstairs to find Thomas sitting by the dying fire, nursing a glass of whiskey, something she'd never seen him do before. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without turning. She settled in the chair across from him. "The wind is fierce." "That's not what's keeping you awake." She studied his profile in the firelight. "How do you know?" "Because something's been weighing on you since you arrived. You carry it like a stone in your pocket, always there, always heavy." He turned to face her. "I told you before when you're ready to share it. I'll listen, but don't let it steal what we're building here." "What are we building?" she whispered. He set down his glass and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "A family, I hope, a future, something real and lasting, based on who we are together, not who we were apart." "But what if who I was?" "Changes nothing," he finished firmly. "Abby, I've watched you these weeks. I've seen you with Leia, seen how you've made this house a home again. I've felt—" He paused, searching for words. "I've felt myself coming back to life, like a tree in spring. That's not based on a name or a past. That's based on you." He reached out, taking her hand gently. His thumb traced over her knuckles, and she shivered at the contact. "Thomas," she breathed, torn between pulling away and moving closer. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I thought you should know. Not to pressure you, not to rush anything, but because it's true and I'm tired of leaving true things unspoken." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand. Trust me with whatever burden you're carrying." His grip on her hand tightened. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." She wanted to tell him everything in that moment. The words crowded in her throat, fighting to get out. But looking at his earnest face, thinking of Laya sleeping peacefully upstairs. She couldn't, not yet. The truth would shatter this fragile, beautiful thing they were building. I need more time," she managed. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Then time you'll have. I'm not going anywhere, Abby, neither is Laya. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." The blizzard blew itself out by morning, leaving the world transformed under feet of snow. Thomas and the Johnson brothers, who had managed to return, worked to dig out the essential paths and check on the stock. Abigail and Leah made snow angels in the yard, their laughter carrying across the white expanse. "Look, Papa," Leah called as Thomas passed with a load of hay. "Abby's angel is dancing." Abigail had indeed made her angel with arms in a different position, giving it the appearance of movement. Thomas stopped, setting down the hay, and surprised them both by flopping backward into the snow himself. "Well then," he said, moving his arms and legs, "mine should dance too." Laya shrieked with delight, and Abigail found herself laughing until her sides ached. When Thomas stood, covered in snow, his eyes met hers over Laya's head. The look he gave her was full of such warmth, such promise, that she felt her heart turn over in her chest. That evening, she found a small package on her pillow. Inside was a delicate necklace, nothing fancy. Just a simple silver chain with a pendant shaped like a wild poppy. "Prairie poppies," Thomas explained when she sought him out, the necklace clutched in trembling fingers. "They bloom after the harshest winters, proof that beautiful things can grow from difficult ground." It reminded me of, well, "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But Thomas, I can't." "Yes, you can." He took the necklace from her hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed her nape, and she shivered. "There, perfect." She turned to face him, her hand going to the pendant. "Thomas, Shh." He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "No more protests about what you deserve or don't deserve. Just let yourself be happy. Let us all be happy." Standing there in the lamplight, snow falling softly outside, Abigail felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She loved this man, loved his daughter, loved the life they were offering her. The truth still loomed, a storm on the horizon. But for now, for tonight, she would let herself belong to this moment, this family, this chance at happiness. "All right," she whispered. "All right." His smile was radiant. "That's my brave girl." As he pulled her into a gentle embrace, their first Abigail closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of hay and winter air that clung to him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The truth still waited, patient and inevitable. But tonight, she was exactly where she wanted to be, in the arms of a good man who loved her, in a house filled with warmth and laughter, wearing a poppy pendant that promised beauty after hardship. The prairie wind howled outside, but within the walls of the Grant Ranch, all was warmth and wonder. And for the first time since boarding that train in Colorado, Abigail allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be stronger than lies, and truth, when it finally came, might bring redemption rather than ruin. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year. transforming the white landscape into a riot of green grass and wildflowers. The prairie poppies Thomas had spoken of bloomed in abundance, their delicate red petals dancing in the warm breeze. Abigail touched the pendant at her throat, a gesture that had become habit, and smiled as she watched Leia chase butterflies through the meadow. 3 months had passed since that snowy night when Thomas had first spoken of love. 3 months of careful courtship, of stolen kisses when Leia wasn't looking, of hands that found each other during evening walks. The house rang with laughter now, and even the Johnson brothers commented on the change. "Never seen the boss so happy," Sam had told her just that morning, tipping his hat with a grin. "You've been good for this place, Miss Eloise." The name still made her flinch, though she'd learned to hide it better. The weight of her deception had not lessened with time, if anything. It had grown heavier as her roots sank deeper into this Wyoming soil. Thomas had begun speaking of marriage, of making their arrangement official. "When you're ready," he always added. But she could see the question in his eyes, the gentle impatience of a man who knew what he wanted and saw no reason to wait. "Papa says we should have a summer wedding," Leia announced over lunch, swinging her legs from her chair. "With flowers and cake and dancing. And I could wear my new dress." "Leia," Thomas said gently, though his ears reddened. "We've discussed this. Abby and I will decide when we're ready." "But you love each other," Leia said with a child's simple logic. "When people love each other, they get married. That's what happened in all of Mama's stories." Abigail's hands trembled as she served the stew. How could she marry this man under a false name? How could she stand before God and witnesses and pledge herself as Eloise, when every fiber of her being was Abigail? "Sometimes," she said carefully. "Grown-up things are more complicated than stories." Leia's face scrunched in thought. "But not too complicated for love to fix. Right, love fixes everything in the end." If only that were true, Abigail thought, meeting Thomas's warm gaze across the table. If only love were enough to wash away lies and make all things new. That afternoon, while Thomas worked with a new horse and Leia napped, Abigail heard the sound that would shatter her carefully constructed world carriage wheels on the drive. She looked out the window, and her blood turned to ice. There, stepping down from a hired carriage with all the dramatic flair she'd always possessed, was Eloise. Behind her, Miriam emerged, her face set in lines of grim determination. For a moment, Abigail couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then survival instinct kicked in, and she rushed to the door, stepping out onto the porch before they could reach it. "What are you doing here?" she whispered harshly. Eloise smiled, the cat-like expression Abigail remembered so well. "Why? Visiting my dear sister. Of course, and meeting my intended husband." She looked around with calculating eyes. What a prosperous situation you've stumbled into. No wonder you haven't written." "You can't be here," Abigail said desperately. "Please, just go." "Go," Miriam's voice cut like a blade. "When you've stolen Eloise's future, I think not." She studied Abigail with cold satisfaction. "You look well. Ranch life agrees with you. But then, you always were suited to common labor." "I'll ask you again," Abigail said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" "What's rightfully mine?" Eloise said, "Samuel Henderson lost his fortune in a bad investment. His father cut him off completely. So here I am, ready to claim my rancher after all." Her smile widened. "Isn't it fortunate that we look enough alike to have pulled off your little deception? Though really, Abigail, did you think you could maintain it forever?" The sound of her real name on Eloise's lips was like a physical blow. Abigail gripped the porch rail, her knuckles white. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "He doesn't deserve to be treated like a commodity to be traded when convenient." Miriam laughed, a harsh sound. "Spare us your moralizing. You've been living a lie for months. Where was your concern for what he deserved then?" "Abby," Leia's voice came from behind her. "Who are the ladies?" Abigail turned to find Leia in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her heart broke at the innocent confusion on the child's face. "Just visitors, sweetheart. Why don't you go back inside?" But Eloise had already stepped forward, her false smile bright. "Hello there. You must be Leia. I'm Eloise Barrett, your papa's intended bride." Leia's face scrunched in confusion. "No, you're not. Abby is papa's intended. He gave her a special necklace and everything." "Abby?" Eloise's eyebrows rose. "How precious. She's using a nickname that sounds like her real name. Tell me, little one, did Abby ever mention having a sister?" "That's enough," Abigail said sharply, moving to shield Leia. "Don't bring her into this." "Into what?" Thomas's voice came from behind them all. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, having approached from the barn without anyone noticing. His eyes took in the scene, the well-dressed strangers, Abigail's defensive stance, Leia's confusion. "Thomas," Abigail began, her voice breaking. But Miriam was already moving forward, all false graciousness. "Mr. Grant, I presume I'm Miriam Barrett, and this is my daughter, Eloise, the real Eloise Barrett. I'm afraid there's been a terrible deception." Thomas's face went very still. His eyes found Abigail's, a question and a plea all at once. "It's true," Abigail whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not Eloise. I'm her stepsister, Abigail. They sent me in her place when she changed her mind about marrying you." The silence that followed was deafening. Leia pressed against Abigail's skirts, confused and frightened. Thomas stood frozen, his face a mask she couldn't read. "I see," he said finally, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And now," Eloise said brightly, "we correct the mistake. Abigail will leave, and I'll take my rightful place as your bride. After all, I'm the one you corresponded with, the one you chose." "Chose," Thomas repeated slowly. He climbed the porch steps, his movements deliberate. "I chose based on letters, on words that painted a picture of a woman I wanted to know." His eyes never left Abigail's face. "Tell me, Miss Barrett, Miss Eloise Barrett, did you write those letters yourself?" Eloise's smile faltered slightly. "Well, Mother helped with the phrasing." "I see. And the accomplishments mentioned the piano playing, the needlework, the love of children." "All true," Eloise said quickly, though Abigail knew for a fact that Eloise could barely thread a needle and had once called children tiresome little beasts. Thomas nodded slowly, then turned to Abigail. "And you? Did you come here willingly?" Abigail's throat closed. "They gave me no choice. It was this or the streets. But Thomas, I swear to you, everything I've felt, everything I've done here, that's all been real. That's all been me." "Touching," Miriam said coldly, "but hardly relevant. The fact remains that she impersonated Eloise, took her place under false pretenses. The marriage contract, such as it is, belongs to my daughter." "There is no marriage contract," Thomas said quietly. "Not yet. And a good thing, too, as it seems I've been corresponding with a fiction created by two women, neither of whom is the person who's been living in my house these past months." He looked at Leia, who was crying silently against Abigail's skirts. "Leia, go inside, please." "But Papa." "Go inside." His tone brooked no argument. Leia gave Abigail one last desperate hug before obeying. Once she was gone, Thomas turned back to the group. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, still in that dangerously calm voice. "You ladies are going to get back in your carriage and return to wherever you came from. You will not contact me again, and you will not set foot on my property." "You can't simply dismiss us," Miriam spluttered. "We have rights." "What rights?" Thomas's voice finally showed emotion, a cold anger that made even Miriam step back. "The right to perpetrate fraud, because that's what this is. Madam, you sent one woman in place of another, took money under false pretenses. If anyone has cause for legal complaint here, it's me." Then complain, Eloise snapped, her pretty mask slipping. Have Abigail arrested, she's the one who's been living the lie. Under your name, at your mother's insistence. Thomas's smile was sharp as a blade. Tell me, Miss Barrett, how do you think the authorities would view this situation, two women conspiring to deceive a man for financial gain, forcing a third to participate under threat of homelessness? Miriam paled. You wouldn't dare. The scandal would ruin you, not me. I am a wronged party who's shown Christian forgiveness by not pressing charges. He stepped closer, looming over them. Leave, now, and be grateful I'm letting you go with your reputations intact. And her, Eloise pointed at Abigail with a shaking finger. You're keeping your little imposter. Thomas's jaw tightened. What I do is no longer your concern. You made your choice months ago when you decided a rancher wasn't good enough for you. Live with it. Miriam grabbed Eloise's arm, pulling her toward the carriage. Come, we're leaving. This isn't over, Eloise called over her shoulder. I'll tell everyone what she did. The whole territory will know she's a fraud. Thomas's voice followed them, steady and implacable. Try it. See how far you get when I explain the whole story, including your part in it. They watched in silence as the carriage pulled away, dust rising in its wake, when it was finally out of sight. Abigail's knees gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, sobbing. I'm sorry, she gasped out. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you 100 times, but I was so afraid you'd send me away. Afraid of losing Laya, afraid of losing you. Abigail. He said her real name quietly, testing it. Your name is Abigail. She nodded miserably. Abigail Margaret Barrett, the unwanted stepdaughter, the burden, the one who wasn't pretty enough or accomplished enough to matter. She laughed bitterly. They were right about one thing, I'm no one special, not like Eloise. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down beside her on the steps, careful not to touch her. Do you know what I thought when I saw you that first day at the stage depot? She shook her head, unable to look at him. I thought you looked nothing like your photograph. Eloise, the real Eloise, is beautiful in the way that makes men stupid. But you, he paused. You looked tired and frightened and brave all at once. You looked real. And when you knelt down to talk to Laya at her level, when you asked about her name with genuine interest, that's when I started hoping this arrangement might work after all. But I lied to you, Abigail whispered. Yes, he agreed. You did. And that hurts. It hurts like hell, if you want the truth. To know that every time I called you by name, you flinched. To know you've been carrying this secret while I've been falling in love with you. She finally looked at him, tears still streaming. Do you hate me? I should, he said quietly. Part of me wants to. It would be easier. He scrubbed a hand over his face. But I keep thinking about what you said, that they gave you no choice. And I think about these months, about who you've been here. The woman who sang Laya to sleep with Irish lullabies, who brought warmth back to this house, who looks at my daughter like she hung the moon and at me like... He trailed off. Like you're everything, Abigail finished softly. Because you are. You and Laya both. This place, this life, it's more than I ever dreamed of having. And I've ruined it all because I was too much of a coward to tell the truth. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Thomas asked, The stories you told about your father, about climbing trees, were those true? Yes, everything personal I told you was true. My father was a good man who died too young. My stepmother resented my existence. I love books and gardening and... She took a shaky breath. And I can't play piano. I can barely carry a tune. My needlework is passable at best. I'm not accomplished or refined or any of the things Eloise claimed to be. But you can make Laya laugh. You can turn a house into a home. You can make a man believe in second chances. He was quiet for a moment. Though I need to know, is there anything else, any other secrets that will come riding up our drive one day? No, she said firmly. Nothing. Just this one terrible lie that I've hated every moment of. Thomas stood abruptly. I need time to think, to figure out what this means, what we do now. He looked down at her, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. I won't ask you to leave. Leia would never forgive me. For one thing, but I need space. I understand, Abigail whispered. He started to walk away, then paused. Your name? Abigail. Leia's been calling you Abby all along. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Somehow that seems fitting. Then he was gone, heading back to the barn, leaving Abigail alone on the porch with the wreckage of her deception scattered around her like fallen leaves. From inside the house, she heard Leia crying, pulling herself together. Abigail went to comfort the child, even as her own heart shattered into pieces. The truth was finally out. The storm had broken, and now all that remained was to weather the aftermath and see what, if anything, could be salvaged from the ruins. The days that followed were the longest of Abigail's life. Thomas kept his word he didn't ask her to leave, but he might as well have built a wall between them. He took his meals at different times, spoke to her only when necessary for household matters, and spent his evenings in the barn rather than by the fire. The easy warmth that had grown between them vanished like morning mist, leaving only cold politeness in its wake. Leia bore the brunt of the change, her young heart confused by the sudden distance between the two people she loved most. She clung to Abigail more than ever, but her eyes followed her father with worried attention. Why doesn't Papa smile anymore? She asked one evening as Abigail tucked her into bed. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, Abigail assured her, smoothing back her dark curls. Never think that. Papa's just working through some grown-up troubles. Is it because of those mean ladies, the pretty one who said she was you? Abigail's throat tightened. It's complicated, Leia. But you're still Abby, aren't you? You're still going to stay? As long as your papa allows it, Abigail whispered, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead. That night, unable to sleep, Abigail found herself in Thomas's study, a small room off the parlor where he kept the ranch accounts and what few books they owned. She ran her fingers along the spines, remembering evenings when he'd read aloud while she sewed and Leia played at their feet. Those days seemed like another lifetime now. On his desk lay an open ledger, and beside it, something that made her heart stop her journal. She'd been keeping it since her arrival, pouring out all the thoughts and feelings she couldn't speak aloud. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, seeing that it was open to an entry from just 2 weeks prior. I am lost. Each day I fall deeper in love with this man and his daughter, and each day the weight of my lie grows heavier. Thomas speaks of marriage, of our future, and I want nothing more than to say yes, but how can I marry him as Eloise when every part of me is Abigail? How can I stand before God and make vows in a name not my own? Asterisk. Yet the thought of leaving, of never seeing his smile or hearing Leia's laugh, of never again feeling the warmth of belonging, it would kill something essential in me. I am a coward, trapped between truth and love, and I don't know how much longer I can bear it. Asterisk, I love him. God help me. I love him with every breath in my body, and that love makes my deception all the more unforgivable. Asterisk, you left it in the kitchen. Thomas's voice came from the doorway, making her jump. I wasn't going to read it, but then I saw Eloise's name and... He shrugged, entering the room. I needed to understand. Abigail set the journal down with shaking hands. I never meant for you to see that. I know. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. Is it true what you wrote? Every word, she whispered. He was silent for so long she wondered if he would speak again. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the lie itself. It's that I understand why you did it. When I think of you, alone, frightened, given an impossible choice, he turned to face her. I want to hate you for deceiving me, and instead, I find myself wanting to ride to Colorado and horsewhip the women who put you in that position. Thomas, I've been going over it again and again, he continued. Every moment since you arrived, looking for signs I missed, for hints of deception. But all I can see is you bringing Laya back to life, making this house a home, looking at me like I was worth something more than just a lonely rancher who advertised for a bride. You are worth everything, Abigail said fiercely. You're the best man I've ever known, kind and patient and good to your bones. You deserve truth from the beginning, and I'm so sorry I couldn't give it to you. Thomas moved closer, and in the lamplight she could see the exhaustion in his face, the pain he'd been carrying. I talked to Reverend Collins today. Her heart sank. Was he seeking guidance about sending her away? I asked him about names. Thomas continued, about whether God cares what we call ourselves, or whether he looks at what's in our hearts. Do you know what he said? Abigail shook her head. He said that God has many names, but his nature remains constant, that what we are matters more than what we're called. Thomas reached out, almost touching her face before pulling back. He also said that love built on honesty, even belated honesty, is stronger than love built on comfortable lies. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 3 days trying to stop loving you, and I've failed utterly. His voice broke slightly. I'm saying that when I saw Laya crying for you yesterday, when I watched you going through the motions of living in this house like a ghost, I realized something. I don't care if your name is Abigail or Eloise or anything else. I care that you're the woman who sang my daughter to sleep, who brings me coffee before I even know I need it, who looks at a sunset like it's a miracle every single time. Tears streamed down Abigail's face. But how can you trust me after this? I don't know, he admitted. But I know I want to try. If you'll let me, if you'll stay not as Eloise, not as anyone but yourself. Abigail Margaret Barrett, unwanted stepdaughter who climbed trees and lost her father too young and came to Wyoming with another woman's name but her own heart. A sob escaped her. You read the whole journal, cover to cover, including the parts about how I snore and how Pete's jokes make you want to hide in the root cellar. A tiny smile quirked his lips. You have strong opinions about my coffee-making technique. It's too weak, she said through her tears. Like brown water. See truth at last. He did touch her face then, gently wiping away tears with his thumb. Will you stay? Will you give us a chance to build something real, with no lies between us? Yes, she breathed. Yes, if you'll have me, the real me. He pulled her into his arms then, and she collapsed against his chest, months of tension and fear pouring out in great, gulping sobs. He held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort. No more secrets, he said when her tears finally slowed. From either of us, and we start fresh, from this moment. Agreed. Agreed. She pulled back to look at him. But what about, legally, officially? I'm nobody. I have no connections, no dowry, nothing to bring to a marriage but myself. Yourself is all I ever wanted, Thomas said firmly. The woman in those letters that fiction Miriam and Eloise created, she sounded perfect on paper. But perfection is cold comfort on a winter night. I'll take real over perfect any day. A small voice from the doorway made them both turn. Does this mean Abby's staying? Laya stood there in her nightgown, hope shining in her eyes. Thomas held out an arm, and she ran to them, creating a three-way embrace. If she'll have us, Thomas said, looking at Abigail over his daughter's head. Forever, Abigail promised, holding them both tight. For as long as you'll let me. The next morning brought a new beginning. Thomas announced at breakfast that they would be going to town, all three of them. Why? Laya asked, bouncing in her seat. Well, Thomas said, his eyes finding Abigail's. I need to speak to Reverend Collins about a wedding. A real wedding, with real names and real promises. Really? Laya shrieked. Abby's going to be my mama for real. If she says yes to a proper proposal, Thomas said. Then, to Abigail's amazement, he pushed back his chair and dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen. Abigail Margaret Barrett, you came to me under circumstances neither of us chose, carrying a name that wasn't yours and a burden that wasn't fair. But in these months, you've shown me who you really are, a woman of courage and kindness, who loves my daughter and has brought light back to our lives. Will you marry me, not as someone you're pretending to be, but as yourself? Through fresh tears, happy ones, this time Abigail nodded. Yes, oh, yes. Leah clapped and cheered as Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto Abigail's finger, his mother's ring. He explained, which he'd been saving for the right moment. It's not fancy, he said apologetically. It's perfect, Abigail assured him. It's honest and real, just like us. In town, they visited Reverend Collins, who listened to their story with compassion and understanding. God works in mysterious ways, he said when they finished. Sometimes he brings us to where we need to be through paths we wouldn't choose ourselves. What matters is that you're choosing honesty now. They set a date for 2 weeks hence, enough time for the banns to be read properly. As they left the church, Abigail felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of deception was finally gone, replaced by the warm certainty of belonging. But their next stop brought an unexpected challenge. At the general store, Mrs. Morrison, the woman whose pickle-scented daughter had once pursued Thomas, gasped dramatically at seeing them together. Mr. Grant, I heard the most shocking story from a traveler yesterday. Something about your mail-order bride being an imposter. The store fell silent, other customers turning to stare. Abigail felt Thomas tense beside her, but before he could speak, she stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, she said calmly. I'm sure the story was quite dramatic in the telling. The truth is simpler. I came here under difficult circumstances, not entirely of my choosing. But Thomas and I have chosen to build our future on truth and love, rather than dwelling on past mistakes. I hope our neighbors will respect that choice. Mrs. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. It was Leah who delivered the final blow, in the way only children can. Papa loves Abby, and Abby loves Papa and me, she announced loudly. And we're going to be a real family, with a wedding and cake and everything. You're not invited if you're going to be mean. A chuckle ran through the store, and Mr. Morrison himself stepped out from behind the counter. Well said, little Miss Grant, ma'am. You'll find no judgment here. We've all got stories we'd rather not tell. What matters is how folks treat their neighbors. And from what I've seen, you've been nothing but an asset to this community. Others nodded agreement, and Abigail felt tears threaten again. But these were tears of gratitude for the acceptance of this frontier community that judged more on character than on past mistakes. As they rode home, Leah chattering excitedly about wedding plans, Thomas reached over and took Abigail's hand. No regrets, he asked quietly. None, she said firmly. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and where I belong. And who are you? He asked, echoing her question from that night by the fire months ago. She smiled, squeezing his hand. I'm Abigail Barrett, soon to be Abigail Grant. I'm Leah's mother in all but blood. I'm the woman who loves you, and I'm finally, truly home. The ranch came into view, golden in the afternoon sun. The prairie poppies nodded in the breeze, and Abigail touched the pendant at her throat. Beauty after hardship, just as Thomas had promised. The journey that had begun in deception had led to truth, and that truth had set her free. As they pulled up to the house, Leah jumped down and ran ahead, calling back, I'm going to draw a picture of Abby's wedding dress with lots of flowers. Thomas helped Abigail down, but instead of releasing her hand, he pulled her close. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For being brave enough to let me see the real you. for giving us a chance at something true." She rose on her tiptoes to kiss him, there in the sunshine with the mountains as witness. "Thank you for seeing past the lie to the truth underneath, for choosing love over anger. Always," he promised. "From this day forward, always." And as they walked hand in hand toward their home, their true home, built on a foundation of honest love, Abigail knew that sometimes the most crooked paths led to the straightest destinations. She had traveled far from that cold house in Colorado, had lost a false identity and found her true self, had discovered that love, when genuine, could indeed conquer all. The day before the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline sky that made the Wyoming mountains seem close enough to touch. Abigail stood in the kitchen, her hands deep in bread dough, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Tomorrow, she would marry Thomas not as Eloise, but as herself. The banns had been read, the simple preparations made, and the whole town seemed to buzz with anticipation for what many were calling the most romantic story Cedar Ridge had ever seen. "Abby!" Leah burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Henderson brought your dress. She says to tell you the alterations are finished." Abigail's heart skipped. The dress Thomas had insisted on ordering fabric from Denver. Beautiful ivory silk that Mrs. Henderson, the town's best seamstress, had transformed into a wedding gown. It was far finer than anything Abigail had ever owned, and the thoughtfulness of it made her eyes sting with grateful tears. "And Papa's been acting strange all morning," Leah continued, dancing around the kitchen. "He keeps checking his pocket watch and riding out to look down the road." Before Abigail could ask why, she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Through the window, she saw Thomas racing back to the house, his face grim. Her stomach dropped. What now? What could possibly go wrong when they were so close to happiness? "Inside, both of you," Thomas commanded as he dismounted, his voice carrying an urgency that brooked no argument. "Now." They obeyed, Abigail pulling Leah close as Thomas barred the door behind them. His jaw was set, his eyes hard in a way she hadn't seen since the day Eloise and Miriam had appeared. "Thomas, what?" "Riders coming," he said tersely. "3 of them. One's a woman." Abigail's blood ran cold. Surely not. Surely Miriam and Eloise wouldn't dare return, not after Thomas's threats. A knock came at the door. No, not a knock. A pounding, aggressive and demanding. "Grant," a man's voice called. "Thomas Grant, we know you're in there. Open up in the name of the law." The law? Abigail swayed on her feet. Had Miriam made good on her threats? Had she found some way to have Abigail arrested for fraud? Thomas steadied her with a hand on her arm. "Stay calm," he murmured. "Let me handle this." Louder, he called. "State your business." "Deputy Marshal Curtis, from Denver. We're here about the Barrett woman, the imposter." Leah whimpered, pressing against Abigail's skirts, with shaking hands. Abigail smoothed the child's hair, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. Thomas opened the door, his body blocking the entrance. "Deputy, what brings you all the way from Denver?" Abigail could see past Thomas's shoulder now. 3 figures sat on horseback, a lean man with a deputy's badge, another man she didn't recognize, and her heart sank. Eloise, dressed in traveling clothes that had seen better days, her usually perfect hair disheveled. "We've had a complaint," the deputy said, dismounting. "This woman claims her identity was stolen, that someone is living here under her name. Serious accusations, Mr. Grant." "Indeed they are," Thomas said evenly. "And entirely false. The woman living in my home is Abigail Barrett, my fiancée. We're to be married tomorrow, as the good reverend and half the town can attest." "That's her," Eloise shrieked, pointing past Thomas to where Abigail stood. "That's my stepsister. She stole my name, my letters, my life." The deputy looked between them, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. The other man, older, with the look of a city lawyer about him, spoke up. "Miss Eloise Barrett hired me to retrieve what was stolen from her," he said smoothly. "Her reputation, her intended marriage, her future. This woman," he gestured at Abigail, "perpetrated a cruel fraud." "Is this true, ma'am?" the deputy asked, his eyes finding Abigail's. "Did you come here claiming to be Eloise Barrett?" Before Abigail could answer, Thomas stepped aside, his hand finding hers and pulling her forward. "She came here because she was given no choice," he said firmly. "Tell them, Abigail, tell them all of it." And so she did, standing in the doorway of the home she'd grown to love, with Thomas's hand warm in hers and Leah peeking out from behind her skirts. Abigail told the whole truth, about her father's death, about Miriam's cruelty, about being forced to take Eloise's place or face destitution. "She's lying," Eloise interrupted repeatedly, but the deputy held up a hand for silence. When Abigail finished, her voice hoarse, the deputy turned to Eloise. "Is it true you originally agreed to marry Mr. I. Grant, that you corresponded with him and accepted his proposal?" Eloise's face flushed. "Yes, but—" "And then you changed your mind. I found a better opportunity. Is that a crime?" "No, miss, but neither is it a crime for your family to send another in your place, if Mr. Grant agreed to it." The deputy turned to Thomas. "Did you agree to this arrangement, sir?" "I agreed to marry the woman who came to me," Thomas said carefully. "I've asked no questions about the past that she wasn't ready to answer. What matters is that Abigail and I are choosing to marry of our own free will, with full knowledge of who we each are." The lawyer stepped forward. "The emotional aspects aside, there's the matter of fraud. Money was sent for Eloise Barrett's travel in trousseau. Money I've offered to repay." Thomas interrupted, "Though I'd argue it was fairly earned, as Abigail has worked this ranch alongside me for months." "Work," Eloise laughed bitterly. "She's lived in comfort while I've been struggling." "Through your own choices," Abigail said quietly, finding her voice at last. "You had everything. Eloise, beauty, opportunities, our mother's love. You threw away Thomas's proposal because you thought you could do better. When that failed, you wanted to take back what you discarded, regardless of who you hurt. You stole my life." "No." Abigail stepped forward, still holding Thomas's hand. "I built my own life, with work and honesty and love. You can't steal what was freely given." The deputy looked between them all, then sighed. "Here's what I see. A family arrangement that went sideways, some hurt feelings, but no actual crime. Mr. Grant isn't pressing charges. The marriage bans have been properly read for Abigail Barrett, not Eloise, unless someone has proof of actual criminal activity." "This is outrageous," the lawyer blustered. "My client has been wronged." "Your client," the deputy said dryly, "seems to have wronged herself. Miss Eloise, I suggest you return to Denver and make what you can of your life there. There's nothing for you here." "But they—" Eloise's perfect composure finally cracked entirely. "It's not fair. I'm the pretty one. I'm the accomplished one. I'm the one men want." "Are you?" Thomas asked quietly. "Because I'm looking at the woman I want, and it isn't you." The words hung in the air like a pronouncement. Eloise's face crumpled, and for the first time, Abigail saw past the vanity to the fear underneath the fear of a woman who'd gambled on her beauty and lost. "Come, Miss Barrett," the lawyer said, clearly recognizing a lost cause. "We should return to town before dark." "This isn't over," Eloise hissed at Abigail. "I'll tell everyone. The whole territory will know you're nothing but a servant girl who got above herself." "Tell them," Abigail said steadily. "Tell them how a frightened woman found courage. Tell them how love grew from unlikely soil. Tell them how a house became a home and 3 lonely people became a family. If that's getting above myself, I'll wear the label proudly." Leah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly darted forward. "You're mean," she told Eloise. "And you smell like sadness. Abby smells like cookies and sunshine. That's why God sent her and not you." The profound truth from the child's lips seemed to deflate Eloise entirely. Without another word, she turned her horse and rode away, the lawyer following. The deputy lingered a moment longer. "Ma'am, Mr. Grant." He tipped his hat. "Congratulations on your upcoming wedding. Seems to me like things worked out the way they were meant to." As the dust settled from their departure, Thomas pulled Abigail into his arms. Right there in the doorway for all the world to see. "Are you all right?" She laughed shakily. "I think so. I can't believe it's really over." "Believe it." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, gentle and sure. "Nothing stands between us now. No lies, no secrets, no ghosts from the past. Just us and our future." "And cake," Laya added, tugging on their clothes. "Don't forget about wedding cake." They laughed, the tension breaking like a fever. The Johnson brothers, who had been watching from the barn, came forward with congratulations and offers to help with last-minute wedding preparations. Mrs. Henderson arrived with the dress, clucking over the drama but clearly pleased it had ended well. The ranch bustled with activity and anticipation. That night, as tradition demanded, Abigail stayed at the Henderson house in town while Thomas remained at the ranch. But before they parted, he pulled her aside for a private moment. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wrapped package. A wedding gift, a day early. Inside was a leather journal, far finer than the simple notebook she'd been using. On the first page, in Thomas's careful script, were the words, "For Abigail Margaret soon-to-be Grant, to fill with the true story of our lives together, with all my love, Thomas." "Oh," she breathed, clutching it to her chest. "It's perfect." "No more hiding your thoughts," he said softly. "No more secrets. Write our story as it really is, messy and complicated and beautiful." "I will," she promised. "Starting with tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he agreed, and the word held all the promise in the world. The wedding day dawned misty and magical, with dewdrops turning the prairie grass to silver. The small church was packed. It seemed the whole town had turned out to witness the union of Thomas Grant and Abigail Barrett, the mail-order bride who wasn't, and the rancher who chose love over convention. As Mr. Henderson walked her down the aisle he'd volunteered, saying every bride deserved someone to give her away proper-like, Abigail's eyes found Thomas waiting at the altar. He wore his Sunday best, his hair carefully combed, but it was the look in his eyes that made her breath catch wonder and love, and a joy so profound it transformed his weathered features. Laya stood beside him in a new yellow dress, fairly vibrating with excitement, clutching a bouquet of prairie poppies she'd picked that morning. Reverend Collins smiled as Abigail reached the altar. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather today to witness something remarkable, not just a wedding, but a testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and love, to transform even the most tangled circumstances into something beautiful." The vows they exchanged were simple but heartfelt. Thomas's voice was rough with emotion as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Abigail Barrett, her real name spoken clearly for all to hear. Abigail's tears flowed freely as she pledged the same, adding her own promise, "I vow to be myself with you, always, and to help create a home built on honesty and love." "And I get to help," Laya piped up, causing gentle laughter to ripple through the congregation. "Yes, sweetheart," Thomas said, ruffling her hair. "You get to help." When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed her there at the altar, the church erupted in cheers. Even Mrs. Morrison was seen dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The reception in the church hall was a joyous affair. The ranch hands had contributed a side of beef for roasting. The church ladies had outdone themselves with covered dishes, and someone had brought a fiddle for dancing. as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Thomas and Abigail Grant danced their first dance as husband and wife, while Leah spun circles around them, her laughter bright as bells. "No regrets," Thomas murmured in her ear as they swayed together. "None," Abigail assured him. "How could I regret the path that brought me to you?" Later, as they prepared to leave for the ranch, their home, Leah tugged on Abigail's wedding dress. "Mama," she said, testing out the words she'd been given permission to use. "Are you happy now?" Abigail knelt down, not caring about the dust on her beautiful dress, and pulled the little girl close. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible, sweetheart." "Good," Leah said decisively, "because I prayed really hard for the right mama, and God sent you, just like I said. He knew we needed you, even if you had a different name at first." And there, in the golden evening light, surrounded by their community and bound by love and law to the man who'd chosen her, the real her, Abigail understood that sometimes the most crooked paths led to the truest destinations. She had been sent instead of her sister, had traveled under a false name with a heavy heart, but she had arrived exactly where she belonged. As Thomas helped her into the wagon to return home, the wedding guests showering them with good wishes and flower petals, Abigail touched the poppy pendant at her throat and smiled. Beauty after hardship, indeed. And what beauty it was, a life built on truth, a family forged by choice, and a love that had conquered every obstacle to bloom wild and free on the Wyoming prairie. 5 years had passed since that golden wedding day, and the Grant Ranch had flourished like the prairie poppies after rain. Abigail stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching as Thomas taught their son, 3-year-old James, how to gentle a colt. Leah, now 11 and growing like a wildflower, sat on the fence offering advice with all the authority of an experienced ranch hand. "Easy, Jamie," Thomas coached, his large hands guiding the boy's small ones. "Let the horse come to you, that's it." "Like when Mama came to us," James announced proudly, his dark hair so like his father's, catching the morning sun. "She came on a train and then she stayed forever." Abigail smiled, touching the poppy pendant she still wore every day, from the mouths of babes. Indeed, the story of how their family came to be had become legend in their household, told and retold with the reverence usually reserved for fairy tales. "Mama, the baby's moving," Leah called, jumping down from the fence to run to Abigail. She placed a gentle hand on Abigail's belly, her face lighting up when she felt the flutter of movement. "Do you think it's a girl this time? I'd like a sister." "We'll love whoever God sends us," Abigail said, smoothing Leah's hair. The girl had grown beautiful, with her mother's delicate features and her father's steady nature. But more than that, she'd grown kind, a testament to the love that had surrounded her these past years. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sam Johnson rode up, tipping his hat with a grin. "Morning, Mrs. Grant letter came for you in town. Thought I'd bring it out since I was heading this way." Abigail's heart skipped as she recognized the handwriting. Colorado, after all these years. "Everything all right?" Thomas asked, coming to stand beside her. James perched on his shoulders. She opened the letter with trembling fingers, aware of her family's concerned gazes. As she read, her expression shifted from apprehension to surprise to something like compassion. "It's from Eloise," she said quietly. She's asking for forgiveness." The letter was long, filled with the kind of honesty Eloise had never shown before. She wrote of failed prospects, of learning humility through hardship, of finally understanding what she'd thrown away in her pursuit of something better. Miriam had died 2 winters past, leaving Eloise truly alone for the first time in her life. "I work now as a seamstress," Eloise wrote. "Can you imagine all those years of looking down on honest work? And now I'm grateful for every customer who walks through the door. I think of you often, Abigail, of how brave you were to take the chance offered, even wrapped in deception as it was. I think of the family you have now, yes. Word has reached even here of your happiness, and I realize that God perhaps knew what he was doing when he sent you instead of me. I would have made that good man miserable with my vanity and discontent. You gave him what I never could have, a true partner, a loving mother for his daughter, a woman of substance rather than mere surface. Asterisk, I don't ask for your friendship. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know that I finally understand. You didn't steal my life. You saved us all from a terrible mistake. Be happy, sister. Be happy for both of us. Asterisk. Abigail looked up to find Thomas reading over her shoulder, his expression thoughtful. Will you write back? He asked. I think so, she said slowly. Forgiveness shouldn't be withheld when genuinely sought. She looked at Leah and James, thinking of the child yet to come. And perhaps there's room in our lives for an aunt who's learned the value of humility. She was mean to you, Leah said, protective as always. She was lost, Abigail corrected gently. Lost people sometimes do mean things, but found people can learn to do better. That afternoon, as James napped and Leah helped Thomas with the accounts, she had a sharp mind for numbers. Abigail sat at her desk and composed a reply. She wrote of forgiveness freely given, of doors that might open in the future, of the strange ways God worked to bring people where they needed to be. She was sealing the letter when she felt the familiar tightening that signaled her time had come. Thomas, she called, trying to keep the urgency from her voice. He was beside her in an instant, reading her face with the experience of a man who'd been through this before. Leah, ride to town and fetch Mrs. Henderson. Tell her the baby's coming. Is Mama going to be all right? Leah asked, even as she grabbed her bonnet. She's the strongest woman I know, Thomas said, pressing a kiss to Abigail's forehead. She'll be just fine. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort, with Thomas steady beside her and Mrs. Henderson offering experienced guidance as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of rose and gold. A new cry joined the symphony of the ranch. A girl, Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the squalling infant in Abigail's arms. Healthy and perfect as can be. Thomas's eyes were wet as he gazed at his new daughter. She's beautiful, just like her mother. What will you name her, Mrs.? Henderson asked, bustling about with practiced efficiency. Abigail looked at Thomas, a question in her eyes. He nodded, understanding as he always did. Hope, Abigail said softly. Hope, Margaret Grant. For the hope that brought us together and the hope that carries us forward. Leah and James were allowed in then, tiptoeing with exaggerated care. James studied his new sister with 3-year-old solemnity before pronouncing, She's very small, but I'll teach her everything when she's bigger. I'll help too, Leah promised, gently touching the baby's downy head. I'll teach her to be brave like Mama and kind like Papa. And to climb trees, Abigail asked with a tired smile. The highest ones, Leah agreed. As the family settled around the bed, Thomas in a chair pulled close. Leah and James snuggled carefully on either side of Abigail, and baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. Abigail marveled at the fullness of her life. The frightened girl who'd boarded a train with another's name could never have imagined this moment. Mama, James said suddenly. Will you tell the story about how you came to be our mama? It's late, sweetheart. You should be sleeping. Please, Leah added her voice. Hope should hear it too, even if she's too little to understand. It's her story too, after all. So Abigail began, her voice soft in the lamplight. Once upon a time, there was a girl who thought she had nothing to offer but herself. She told of fear and courage, of lies that led to truth, of love that grew in unlikely ground. She told of a little girl's prayers and a father's patience, of forgiveness and second chances. As she spoke, Thomas added his own memories of first seeing her at the stage depot, of watching her bring his home to life, of falling in love with her true self rather than any pretense. And then God sent James. Leah contributed. And now hope, because we're a family that keeps growing. That's right, Abigail agreed, her heart full to bursting. A family built on truth and choice and love. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet celebration. Sam Johnson peered in, hat in hand. Sorry to disturb, but there's folks gathering outside. Word spread about the baby, and seems like half the town wants to pay their respects. Indeed, the yard was filling with neighbors and friends. The Hendersons had brought food. Reverend Collins offered prayers, and even Mrs. Morrison had come with a hand-knitted blanket for the baby. The community that had witnessed their unusual beginning now celebrated their growing happiness. As Thomas went to greet their visitors, Abigail gazed out the window at the scene lanterns dotting the yard like earthbound stars. Voices raised in congratulation and song, her husband moving among them with James on his shoulders and Leah by his side. This was what she'd found when she'd stepped off that stage 5 years ago, not just a husband and daughter, but a whole world of belonging. Your papa was right, she whispered to Hope. Beautiful things do grow from difficult ground. Later, after the visitors had gone and the children were asleep, Thomas and Abigail sat on the porch as they had so many evenings before. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. Do you ever think about it? Thomas asked. How different things might have been. Sometimes, Abigail admitted. But then I look at our life at Leah growing strong and confident, at James with your gentle heart, at Hope who wouldn't exist if things had been different, and I can only be grateful for the path that brought us here. Even the difficult parts, especially those, they taught us the value of truth, the power of forgiveness, the strength that comes from choosing love over fear. Thomas took her hand, lifting it to his lips as he had that night by the fire years ago. Mrs. Grant, have I told you today how grateful I am that you were the one who stepped off that stage? Only a dozen times, she laughed. But I never tire of hearing it. Good, because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives. As they sat together, the ranch peaceful around them, Abigail thought about the letter she'd written to Eloise. Perhaps next Christmas, there would be one more at their table. Perhaps redemption could spread like ripples in a pond, touching lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The prairie wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightbird sang. Inside the house, their children slept safe and loved, dreaming whatever dreams came to hearts that had never known abandonment or deceit. And on the porch, two people who had found each other through the strangest of circumstances held hands and planned their future, a future as wide and promising as the Wyoming sky. The mail-order bride who wasn't had become the wife and mother who absolutely was. The name on the original letters had long since ceased to matter. What mattered was the life built day by day, choice by choice, truth by truth. What mattered was the love that had transformed a convenient arrangement into a grand adventure. As Thomas had once said, things with good roots always came back, and here on the Grant Ranch, roots ran deep, watered by honesty and tended with care. The family that had begun with a lie had grown into something beautiful and true proof that God did indeed send exactly what was needed, even if it came in unexpected packages. The stars wheeled overhead. The ranch slept, and all was right in their corner of the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, but tonight, there was only gratitude for the journey that had brought them home. In her journal that night, Abigail wrote, I came to Wyoming as someone else and found myself. I came expecting servitude and found partnership. I came running from one life and ran straight into the arms of another, the life I was always meant to live. Let those who hear our story know sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the strangest paper, and sometimes, when a little girl prays for a mother, God sends exactly the right woman even if she arrives wearing the wrong name. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and finding where you truly belong in the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss What touched your heart in Abigail and Thomas's journey? If this story moved you, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage and romance from America's frontier. Until next time, partners.